Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Mohammed, as we have just mentioned before the report, Egypt and France are heading towards strengthening their economic cooperation. And as you mentioned earlier, several points were discussed during President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi's latest visit in October to France. They were negotiated back then and implemented and signed during this time. 30 agreements, as we heard in the report, and memos of understanding between Paris and Cairo were signed, covering various sectors, including transportation, internal trade, health, education, youth, and infrastructure. How would this further boost economic cooperation between Egypt and France?
Well, first of all, the number of agreements we signed with the French side are very important for us, as they tackle many important issues for us. As you mentioned, such as culture, economical and social, transportation, health, education sector. We have to remember here that France is one of the nations that have a great experience, especially in education.
Yes.
And that would benefit us if we get to know the know-how of how they implemented such a system to benefit our citizens, for sure. As well as
health too. There are plans to develop the Qasr hospital.
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
This is the concerning the health sector agreement. They agreed for sure on developing many facilities, such as Qasr, as you mentioned. But the thing that catches my eye here is the agreements over the tourism sector. As we all know, Egypt is recovering now.
Yes.
And trying to get back to its place in the tourism world, if we might say.
And the thing is, the French people are crazy about the Egyptian civilization, but the numbers of French tourists coming to Egypt is not the aspired one.
And we are looking forward to get the number that we are looking for. These agreements hopefully would improve the numbers that we of French people visiting Egypt, as well as President Macron's visit to Luxor and Aswan for sure would market that for them. And talking about the economical future, we all know that French supported us previously in many fields, as Dr. Cherif mentioned earlier, and making the Suez Canal before. Now, with this kind of agreements that we have, I think if these agreements were implemented, especially agreements concerning small and medium projects and entrepreneurship, this agreement, if it's implemented, it would for sure boost the Egyptian economy.
Yes.
Through investments. Outside investment through the French investors. We all know that around 40 French businessmen have visited Egypt with the French president, which for sure would benefit us, and as well as it would make them see new areas of investment in Egypt.
Yes. Dr. Cherif, Egypt and France have strengthened not only economic ties but also military ties since President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi took office in 2014. Would you brief us about the major steps taken by the two sides throughout the last couple of years in order to get this goal achieved?
Well, first of all, we had the Rafale
purchase.
Of course, the 24 Rafale, and this time there is 12 Rafale, and there is 2 Corvette, Go-Wind Corvette. These are the superb now in the technology of the naval military equipment. So this part is being ensured because, as I said before, that Egypt is the cornerstone of stability for Europe also. In the Middle East, and Egypt, even President Macron said it, that Egypt's stability is something that we are always keen that it's guaranteed. And I think that since we got the Mistral, for example, we have seen that many of let's say in the Red Sea, there is movements being calmed. There is also the illegal immigration from Libya has been calmed down. So it shows that we use this equipment in a wise way for the interest of the peace in the Middle East and in the Mediterranean. We never use these equipments for any aggression.
Yes.
And we don't use it even for only our protection, but the protections also of our neighbors who need it, like Libya, for example, who doesn't have any navy or any army now. So we're strengthening our brothers in the Arab countries.
This has been the strategy of the Egyptian army since the dawn of history. Since the Pharaoh's time.
Of course.
This has been the strategy of the
That's why whenever they try to find any excuses to criticize Egypt, at the end, it ends by signing all these purchases, because they know the reality that Egypt has a doctrine, a military doctrine. There is no aggression, there is no interference in other countries' affairs. It's always for the defense, and it's always for the peace in this region.
Okay.
So,
not to mention also the maneuvers and joint military exercises carried out between both sides.
The Bright Star maneuvers, and we have also with the special forces of France, and recently we had many maneuvers between both navies. From all I know, that the French respect highly the Egyptian Navy.
Yes.
They know it's very professional, that it guarantees the security even for the gas fields and all these parts in the Mediterranean. It has a role of rescue, a role of combating arms and drug trafficking, and also the illegal immigration. And it has, what is amazing about the Egyptian armed forces is that whenever we have the equipment, we know how to use it. I heard this comment from several French people there who was in some important positions. When we got the Rafale, they said we were amazed by the Egyptian pilots because we delivered some of these planes, for example, for the Pakistanis and the Indians, and they said we had a hard time, for example. They said the Egyptian pilots were amazing in the way they go and study they live the machine itself, they know how to use it, and they say that's why we're always eager to train with them.
Yes. Well, back to you, Mr. Mohammed. The major MOUs signed between the two sides cover the strategic partnership between Egypt and France on social and economic development from 2019 to 2023, based on Egypt's 2030 Sustainable Development Plan. Would you tell us more about those MOUs in light of Egypt's 2030 Sustainable Development Plan?
It comes within the plan of Egypt 2030 for sure, for sustainable development. Most of the agreements and the MOUs that we had with the French side was concerning areas as education, culture, economical development, which we would benefit very much from the French side, as they had a leading experience of this area. Egypt Vision 2030 is being conducted in a very high level, presidency level. Egypt's trying to boost this plan by making a lot of effort, international effort, internal effort. A lot of agreements have been conducted to make sure that this plan is going and being implemented within the time. And I would add, if I may, on your previous question to Dr. Cherif, that as well as they didn't only give us the go-wind, they also give us the know-how for the go-wind. I believe it was structured in Egypt under the French side surveillance, and we had many steps to ensure the military cooperation between the two countries, such as Ramses.
Nefertari, I believe that was the name of
Cleopatra and Ramses, the joint military training of Cleopatra and Ramses, and the last one was in December in the Red Sea, if I remember.
Yes. Can we say that Egypt further emphasizes its role in Africa through boosting foreign relations with European countries? Now, Egypt is to assume the presidency of the African Union very soon. Egypt is an African country. France is a Mediterranean country, sharing the fact with Egypt that Egypt is, again, a Mediterranean country. Do you think that France views Egypt not only as a political powerhouse, but also an economic gateway to Africa?
Of course, now they see that Egypt made huge steps in the economic reforms and in the infrastructure, which is attracting all the foreign investors. This is an important point because now the French and Europeans in general, well, in between brackets, we have seen lately the European-African Summit in Austria, and President Sisi attended this summit because Egypt again, it's the cornerstone for these relations. But going back to the economic relations with Egypt for Africa, the Europeans now are facing difficult times with the competition with the Russians and the Chinese in Africa. They are inaugurating projects within the African states. They're not like the Europeans have done, exploiting the rich mines of gold and other materials, raw materials, and go back to Europe. Now they're inaugurating factories there, working with the local peoples and giving them the share of the benefits. So now they're trying to find an entry in this. We have seen the sector of the Canal of Suez that we have said that we were waiting for the investments. We have seen the Chinese and the Russians there, and now I think that the French will work on it also. The strengthening of the cooperation, the economic relations in this, of course, it will attract the African nations because Africa has a close relation with France. So they usually, for example, I remember going back to the education part, for example, when we had the Leopold Senghor University in Alexandria, many African students went there. So this is very important for us as Egypt. When we strengthen the relation with Europe as a neighbor in the Mediterranean and the gateway to Africa, we are the gaining part in all that.
Yes.
We are the gaining part with the Europeans because of the investments, and we are gaining also for Africa. And I think that the role of Egypt as the president of the African Union, even President Macron said it, that we count on Egypt in several issues, and that I think that Egypt will present more the case of Africa. The eagerness to develop economically and socially, we will present it to the world and in the international organizations. We will have a role which is
and this even started before Egypt assuming the presidency of the African Union.
Of course,
since President Abdel Fattah Sisi took office, a new chapter with African countries, a new era commenced with all these visits to African countries, African leaders coming to Egypt, further discussing Egyptian-African cooperation.
Finally, we have discovered that we have neglected our backyard, saying that our neighborhood, and I appreciate something. President Sisi, when he talks even about the Ethiopians, he uses the word our brothers.
Yes.
It's a relation of brotherhood with the African nations.
Okay. Finally, I would like to talk about terrorism and how can the media help in combating terrorism. Now, both Egypt and France have suffered from this phenomenon, unfortunately, and both leaders have discussed ways of cooperation in order to combat terrorism. What would be the role of the media in this regard?
Well, as President Sisi said it in the press conference, we look at your affairs in the eyes of the Europeans, and we wait the same thing from you. Meaning that when France took, and I was there, very harsh steps in the demonstrations, the gatherings, and the civil liberties to guarantee the security and to combat terrorism, we never criticized that in the media. We said we understand what you're doing, and that's what we are waiting for, the recognition of that. So the media has to recognize that whenever there is legal steps taken by this country or this country, is for the interest of the security. We know our own affairs as we respect other people's affairs.
Okay, what's your take on that, Mr.
Well, I think France learned the lesson the hard way. Well, I remember very well that the foreign media were criticizing us on how we were dealing with the demonstrations here in Cairo. Well, they know now very well, especially after the Yellow Vest movements, that there is no way to make sure 100% that the demonstration goes peacefully.
Yes.
So, as Dr. Cherif said, now they can understand our point of view. And as our president said, they should look to Egypt in the Egyptian eyes, not in the European eyes, as they do. I think for the media, they should avoid putting any material that would attract people to violence or attract people to even certain ideologies. Yes, exactly. I understand very well that the French side had suffered a lot from terrorism, as we did here in Egypt. For the media, more of moderate programs, more of moderate ideologies, more of moderate programs should be viewed on the TV or on the newspapers. So the people here in Egypt cannot get attracted with any wrong ideology or anything that led to terrorism or violence.
Yes. Actually, during the visit by President Macron to when he met with Sheikh Ahmed Al-Tayyib, he also said that Al-Azhar is going to offer scholarships for that particular purpose. I'd like to thank you very much, my dear guest, Dr. Cherif Amir, geopolitical researcher, Sorbonne University. Thank you very much, sir, for being with us. And also Mr. Mohammed Adel Heiker, researcher at the Egyptian Center for Strategic Studies. Thank you very much. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for being with us in this edition of the Daily Debate. I'm Hala Al-Hamalawi signing off for now.